What does it take to build something important enough to take with you, no matter where you go? Resilient enough to withstand your best days and your worst days. Beautiful enough to be worth your patience and commitment. What if it just took saying yes, day after day? What if you committed to no days disconnected from your God? Every day.
Hey, I'm Ashley, and I've got a question for you. Have you ever been to a wedding reception? You know, the moment where there's a party or a celebration right after the wedding? Maybe your older sister was getting married, or maybe it was your small group leader. Maybe it was your aunt even getting married, but whoever it was, you were close enough to them to be on the guest list for the wedding reception. Now, at some point, a few people, typically the best man or the maid of honor and a couple of parents, will take turns recognizing the couple, sharing stories of their own life, and testing out how successful they'd be at stand-up comedy. Now, during these toasts, you learn so much about the bride and the groom's life. Maybe you discover that one of them is passionate about helping kids, or that one of them is an artist, or that one of them might be studying to be a lawyer, or that one is extremely honest, sometimes too honest. And when you leave that reception, you feel like you know them better than you did before. In a lot of ways, getting to know God works this way as well. When you're around other people who are talking about God, you learn new things about God. You discover ways that God has changed people's lives. You learn different ways that people have connected with God. You understand new ways that people have experienced God's love, grace, and forgiveness, on and on and on. And all of a sudden, you find yourself understanding things about God that you never knew before. Sometimes, in fact, it's stuff that you've never even thought of. Now, on the other side of this is true as well. When you talk about God, you get to know God better. Now, in this series, Every Day, we've been talking about how most of us view getting to know God as a requirement, like doing homework or going to school. But in reality, it's more like the way you first developed a relationship with some of your closest friends. You just spend time with them. And when it comes to God, you can spend time with God every day. Now, let me first recognize that some of you might say you're shy or you don't like talking to people like that. The idea of talking about anything makes you nervous, and I get that. And I want you to know that God loves you exactly as you are. We are all wired with different personalities, so surely that will play a factor in this. But when it comes to talking specifically about our faith in God, even the most outgoing of us can get in our head about it. It's not like we have a ton of practice with talking about God. So we wonder things like, what would I say? When I'm having a conversation with somebody, especially someone who's not familiar with what it means to follow God, it's hard to know what to say. And how do you make it seem like a natural part of the conversation? Another thing we might think is, what if I sound stupid? What if someone asks me what I believe about a controversial subject? And what if I fumble my way through the explanation of my viewpoint? By the way, that has happened to me more than once. But bottom line, what if I make an idiot of myself? Because when it comes to something as important as our faith, we want to sound smart and confident. And if we don't feel like we're gonna sound that way, then we might as well just stay quiet, right? Another thing we might think is, am I even sure about what I believe about certain things? Most people's beliefs change a little bit over time, and that's a good thing. I'm not saying that we abandon the core pieces of our faith, but there may be some things we once took a strong stand for or against that we now don't feel so strongly about. And there may be a time in the future when we have a hard time with things that we feel 100% certain about right now. So if our beliefs are prone to change, how can we be secure enough to talk about them right now? Okay, another thing we might think is, will I make people mad? Listen, it's no secret that faith can be a heated subject. The idea of us admitting that we're Jesus followers can instill some fear and insecurity because we don't want to find ourselves in heated, angry arguments. Chances are you have questions I haven't even thought of. Some questions are easy to answer and some are complicated. Some take a short amount of time to sort through, and some take years. But for the sake of what we're talking about, I want to make it super simple. In fact, I want to bring it down to one simple word: reasons. So whether we realize it or not, When we do things, believe things, or accept things, all of us have a reason behind it. If you're in a relationship, there is a reason you're dating or hanging out with them. There's just things you like about them. If you play a sport, there's probably a reason. Maybe it's the sport your dad or older brother or sister played with you when you were a kid. If you do musical theater, there's a reason. Because you're a great singer, or because you love the people that you're involved in the program with, or because you saw a show like Les Mis or Hamilton that moved you deeply. If you have a favorite class at school, there's probably a reason. You love the teacher or the subject matter, or there's that special someone in the class that you've been crushing on. And I think the same is true when it comes to our relationship with God. It's important to know the why and the reason. For us to be able to talk about our faith, knowing our reason is crucial. In the book, 1 Peter, Peter, the guy who wrote the book, addresses those moments that we have when we have an opportunity to talk to people about our relationship with God. He says this: always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. So let's say you have a friend, a classmate, a teammate, or a bandmate who asks you why, the reason that you believe what you believe. Peter is basically saying, be ready to talk at that moment. Now, before you break into cold sweats, let's clear up some things. Okay, when Peter says always be prepared to give an answer to everyone, he's not saying that you have to become a preacher, understand 100% of the Bible, or be able to explain dispensational eschatology. Like, what does that even mean? But don't miss the phrase Peter mentions at the end of the verse, for the hope that you have. Peter is simply referring to what he did in those situations. He shared his story and his understanding of Jesus. But that might still sound overwhelming, so maybe this illustration will help. Let's say that you go to the Grand Canyon with your family on vacation. Now, I've never been to the Grand Canyon, but I hear that it's awesome. So let's say that you went and it was an awesome trip. You loved it and your family got along better than usual. Now, when you get home, there would probably be people who would ask about it. Friends, teachers, classmates, family members. They're all gonna ask the exact same question. How was your trip? In that moment, they're asking you to recap the experience as it happened to you. They don't want to hear about your cousin's trip there. They don't care about what the guidebook says. You don't have to even know the types of rocks that are in the canyon walls. No, when they ask how was your trip, they're asking what the experience was like for you. So you pick up your phone and as you're scrolling through photos, you'll talk about what was awesome, what your favorite part was, and how the canyon was bigger than you expected. You won't scroll through the Wikipedia page of the Grand Canyon or read other people's reviews of it. You'll simply share your experience. The same is true when you and I talk about our relationship with God. We don't have to be able to explain everything in the Bible. All we have to know how to do is talk about our life, our story, and our journey with God. All we have to share is what we've experienced, felt, enjoyed, or benefited from in our personal faith. Then Peter concludes this thought by saying this: but do this with gentleness and respect. This is not just an afterthought. This is crucial because when you think about how conversations usually go when it comes to religion and faith, gentleness and respect are not the words that tend to describe them. So how do you talk about your faith with gentleness and respect? Well, you don't talk about it just to start an argument. You don't talk about it to shame or judge someone. You don't talk about it because you're convinced that you're right and everyone who believes differently is wrong. No, just share your story in a gentle and respectful way. Share what you know to be true in your experience. When you share what's real for you, it makes you real to others. It makes the conversation more authentic because people can see through some type of fabricated church talk. They can tell if you're just saying things because you think that's what you're supposed to say, or if you're rattling off a list of facts in an attempt to force someone to believe something. And trust me, I've done it. We've all said things because, well, they're the right things to say. But when you share from your heart and your experience with God, you come across as a real person who's had a real encounter with Jesus. Okay, so back to Peter. In the book of Acts in the New Testament, he was with his friend John. We learned that in Acts chapter 3 that Peter and John healed a man born crippled. Chaos ensued, which tends to happen when a man who has never walked is now running around joyfully. People are absolutely shocked at this miracle, and Peter and John used the opportunity to tell everyone who would listen about Jesus. Now, as they did, a few religious leaders noticed something. So take a look. When they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. It was obvious to the religious leaders that Peter and John were not trained or educated in talking about their faith. They didn't know as many details as other people might have. They probably would not have won a debate about everything in the scriptures or even everything that Jesus said and did. But what they did know still mattered. They knew who Jesus was. They knew him because they experienced him. They had a real relationship and connection with him. So that's what they talked about. That's what left the people listening so amazed. The more Peter and John talked about Jesus, the more everyone around them not only realized that they knew what they were talking about, but they also knew who they were talking about. So here's what Peter and John understood. We can talk about God every day. Because of how Peter and John talked about God, many of the people around them wanted to know God too. You and I can follow their lead. We may not know all the answers, but we can know God. We can talk about what we've experienced. We can share what we hope to learn about God as we grow in faith. We can talk about God, not just so other people will know God better, but so that we'll know God better too. The more we share our thoughts, experiences, and even questions about God with others, the more we'll be challenged to keep talking, keep growing, and keep getting to know God ourselves. And that will help us make sharing about God part of our everyday faith. So here are a few things that I want us to remember to make this a little easier this week. First, you don't need to know everything to talk about God. Peter and John weren't the smartest or the most educated people. They were just two guys who knew Jesus. And Jesus shows us what God is like. They got to know God in real ways, and they let that motivate them to talk about God to others. They weren't looking to debate or prove a point. They were just simply looking to share their experiences with God. So as you consider how you can make talking about God part of your everyday faith, try doing the same. Focus on who you're talking about. Instead of worrying about needing to know all the answers and all the details, we can share more about who God is and how God has impacted our lives. If we don't know how to talk about how God created the world, maybe instead we can talk about how we see God's creativity in the world around us now. While we may not be able to explain why bad things happen, we can talk about how God comforts and supports us when they do. And second, start by talking about what's happened in your own life. If you've experienced God, you can talk about God. All you need is to share what you know about God from the relationship with God you have right now. If you've seen God answer a prayer, share that. If you've seen God change your attitude towards someone who hurt you, talk about that. If you've ever seen God do anything big or small in your life or the life of someone you know, tell it. Tell your stories. Talk about what you've experienced. You can even share your questions and your doubts. Be brave enough to start the conversation with an older, wiser person and see what happens. You may be amazed at what you learn in the process. We can talk about God every day. Just think about what might happen if we chose to give this a try. Peter and John kept talking about God, and thousands of people's lives were changed because of it. We can read so much of what they wrote down about those experiences in the New Testament. Those two guys helped millions upon millions of people today know God better, simply by talking about God thousands of years ago. And I think we can be a part of continuing that movement. We can share our stories, our doubts, our experiences, and questions about God with the people around us. And a great place to start is in your small group. So when you head to small group, think about how you would answer this question. What is one thing I know about God that I can talk about?